All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Free Will Project. My name is Chet, and I'm here to explore the concept of and the science around the subject of free will. I am not an expert in this subject. I do have an academic background in anthropology and religious studies, so I have some information that's relevant to this subject, but really, we're just all here to learn and explore this information together. So hopefully this becomes a valuable resource to whoever's watching. I want to thank Corey from Chirpcast for helping me get started on this path. I will somewhere link to the first episode that I have with Corey. If you're curious what Chirp is, it's a social media with a cryptocurrency built into it. I'm not going to go into any more detail here, but you can find that stuff and look into it if you're interested. The Free Will Project is also a group on Facebook. It's a private group, but you can find it just by searching Free Will Project. And just once again, thank you to Corey for kind of giving me a nudge and having me turn this into something other than just like a Facebook rant or a blog post. Yeah, so I'm here with my good friend Alex. Alex, maybe give us a little bit of background on who you are and what's influenced your perspective of the world.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Alex Waite. I grew up uh, thinking a lot about these topics. I've always been kind of a philosophical thinker, and was worried about this really from an early age. Even in high school, it started to boil up for me as something that didn't seem quite right about how we viewed the world. But that's because I was going through a major philosophical change in my own life. So my background is that I was raised a fundamentalist Christian, believing that every word of the Bible was literally true, was the literal word of God. And now I found myself at 26 years old for the first time ever admitting to the world that I was atheist. And obviously, you don't get there. While I wasn't formally educated from one point to the other, I didn't get there by just thinking about it myself, right? I was reading probably a new book every 3 months for the entirety of my 20s, trying to reevaluate what my worldview was because I hit a point where I didn't know. Somewhere around age 22, I had had my third child and realized that my entire view of the world wasn't working out. It just didn't match up with how I behaved or operated in it. So my career has been in sales. There's a lot of psychology and understanding how people think involved with sales. You can't make friends and influence people unless you have a little bit of a good handle on how you evaluate their mind and how they're going to interpret your messages. And
Right.
so I think they've kind of gone hand in hand, right? Like they've kind of, as I've gotten really, really good at my sales career, I've also been more and more interested in the human mind and how we think and how we evaluate deep world concepts. So I guess that's probably the best intro I can give for my work and how I got on this topic.
That was awesome. That was awesome. Are there any big names that you would cite as like kind of like, oh, this is really the guy or gal that like gave me a nudge towards where I am now, or is it just kind of like a conglomeration?
Yeah, it's hard for me. When I tell people about my worldview change, I liken it to a Jenga tower. I've actually wrote a couple pieces about that because it was kind of like I had this one full, tall, fully constructed Jenga tower that was God is real and is personal and cares about everything that I do. And one by one, little beliefs that added up to that came out piece by piece. And it was from different authors, different people. The earliest work that I did for myself was probably Bart Ehrman, who writes very, if you're familiar, he writes books that are very palatable for someone who's just questioning what they've been told about the history of the Bible and something like that. And that kind of got me started on realizing that I clearly didn't agree or believe what I had been raised to. And now I needed to figure out what was new. And then from there, I read a lot of different authors. But if there was one that had the most influence on me, it's definitely Sam Harris. His book
Right.
Free Will was phenomenal. The Moral Landscape, I think those two books in combination helped me realize the hardest thing I had to make sense of was I deeply cared about world issues, right? Like I knew that there were things that were wrong, but I felt like after I lost my faith, I didn't know why they were wrong anymore. And it was like I needed to figure that part out because
Right.
what otherwise, how do I know what I believe? And so I became very interested in what we call critical thinking and making good arguments. Yeah,
I like that. I like that.
yeah.
So you talked about how like your change in perspectives kind of informed your morality. I imagine that like that informs how you move through the world like on a daily basis. Like you,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and kind of this to tie it back to what I mean by I didn't even realize how much sales even tied into it. Like, what am I doing in my career, right? Um, I live by this mantra now that every conversation is an opportunity to make the world a marginally better place. And so, what I'm going to say in the next minute matters. It matters for you, it matters for me, and it matters for the people that we're going to influence, and it has a ripple effect through our lives. And so saying things that are wrong or harmful or intentionally misleading also really matters. And it's important to avoid that. And so that really changed. I think I just started to care a lot more. It's really what it comes down to. It started to matter more. Conversations weren't just something I did to socially operate. They were something I do because I care about who I'm speaking with. And that changes you in a pretty radical way, in ways that aren't exactly obvious.
isn't it a little bit ironic that like a lot of people would listen to the type of worldview you're describing and associate it with like apathy or some sort of nihilism or something like that. And it seems like what you're saying is like it's
Yeah,
actually kind of the opposite, that like you've found like a
correct.
reason to care.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and again, I think, I mean, I'll just state it. I don't think nihilism is true or correct. I have a lot of deep flaws with nihilistic thinking, but I didn't know why I did, right? I needed to
Right.
have good arguments about that. So I went searching for them. And uh, I learn new stuff about my own worldview every day, like we all do. I'm sure, half of what I'm talking about today, I'll find out later, wasn't the perfect view of it. But I know for sure that it's a lot better than what my view used to be. Like that's what I'm now certain of. It's like I've moved from bad arguments to at least the best argument available.
Right.
That's like, yeah,
Getting better, that matters, right?
yeah,
That,
yep,
uh,
yep,
it's better than thinking you're perfect and being wrong.
correct, correct.
Let's see. You had mentioned we chatted a little bit before this, and you had mentioned that you found the issue of free will relating to our experience as like like a sort of egoic being. Like there's a relationship between free will and the ego, and I was curious if you'd want
Yeah,
to go into that a little bit.
yeah. So for me, what and I'll give you the very first time I think I started thinking about this specific issue was it's a situation that's quite personal to me, and I didn't realize it would be so impactful. So I had a high school girlfriend who had lost her mother to cancer and was living with her aunt full time. We might call it a second mother kind of situation. And because we were dating for, I don't know, a year and a half, I would be over there all the time. And somewhere further down the relationship, I found out that her aunt that she lived with had a son, and her son was blind, deaf, and quadriplegic. And it, I just, it ran face first into my, at the time, notions of free will and moral duties. Because it was like, what can we expect from someone whose sensory experience is so foreign to us, right?
Right.
Like, what is a moral action that he could do that we would judge as good or not good. The whole concept of free will with someone who has none of the sensory inputs that you or I have makes no sense. I mean, he has no ability to move anything but his head, and he only knows pain or pleasure. I mean, his limit of possible experiences is so. And then the crazy part is, I mean, the kid was 19 at the time. You know, he'd gone through his whole life being essentially had to be full time cared for this way. And seeing the deep amount of love that she had for her son, who had no way to give it back in the way that you and I would normally expect in like a reciprocal bond with another person, right?
Right.
Like, but she was just willing to give it and willing to make sacrifices and freely with it. It was like, I'm missing some part of this equation. And so it really got me thinking about what is the self like for him? He doesn't know what his name is. The name is an arbitrary figure that we've all given to him, right? For him, there is just what it's like to be him, right? There's just the conscious experience he has, which is really just feelings, right? I mean, being blind doesn't mean he has no vision. He has a visual field, but it's certainly very different than what you or I experience.
Right.
Being deaf doesn't mean that there's no auditory input. It's just one that's so limited that things would have no distinguishing factors between one or another. How would language form? And it makes you really wonder about these things. You know, what is the difference between a human's sensory input and what we expect from human behavior and that of an animal or a bovine creature or something that clearly has feelings, right? And has emotions. And I realized there was a continuum of this that I had never thought about because growing up as a Christian, what was told to me is that you are responsible for all your actions. And if you do bad things, it puts you on one ledger, and you do good things, it puts you on the other ledger. That's really it. And it's like
It's spiritual
it's more
economics.
yeah, it's more complicated than that. Like, you know, clearly there's something deeper at play. And so I really realized, like, what would it like to be a self without the name?
I
And what would my free like what is his free will, you know?
Just to jump in real quick, I recently
Yeah,
read a bit about Helen Keller, and
yeah,
apparently she didn't have a sense of self until she was taught language. Like she was taught the
right,
sign language through touch, and she has like descriptions of what her experience was before developing a sense of self. And I'm like, what a what a unique perspective on the world. What amazing insight lies in that kind of experience that the rest of us are um, just kind of oblivious to, right? Kind of like you were saying, is like just knowing someone like that challenges the whole your whole structure of how you think about the world. You're like, wow, here's an experience that's just outside of my frame of reference, and it really like engages its
right.
critical faculties.
Well, and so I'll give you some of the higher order questions that came out of it. So one would be if in their as all things in philosophy, they go to a dark place, but like I'd like to break it out to the extremes, right? If we began to starve this child, this 19-year-old kid what would his reaction be to that, right?
I think you do
We
like Sam
like if we
Harris.
took all his
He's a
well,
big
like
fan of like
if
the exciting thought experiments.
if he starts biting everything that comes near him, I'm not going to think, "Hey, you asshole, don't bite me." I'm going to think this person needs to be fed now. Like he's clearly very
Right.
hungry, and yeah, I'm not going to hold him responsible for that. So it
Right.
really like brought in some next level questions. Yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah, no, and it
Meanwhile, if anybody else bites me, I might be upset. Don't you know? And justifiably, maybe we'll find out. But
yeah, no, that is interesting though. I think similarly, and I've read Sam's Free Will. I thought it was a very good book. I, I I have mixed feelings about his work overall, but I think on Free Will in particular,
sure,
he's very good. Um, and
yeah,
he writes in a very accessible language that a lot of this conversation happens in philosophy departments, and if you ever go like into that territory trying to read that stuff, it gets real esoteric real quick. So that's one of the
Yeah,
things I'm wanting to try to increase accessibility uh, through this project, try to make some of these ideas a little easier to grasp. So, yeah, if anyone's listening, regardless of what you think about Sam Harris, check out the Free Will book. It's easy to read. It's short. I remember one of the things he said was, it's kind of a way of avoiding being misunderstood, is to write a short book, so that way
yeah.
people actually finish it. Um, but yeah, I
Well, and it's probably the most concise explanations for why he took a lot of higher order, more complicated arguments
mhm.
and made them, like you said, simple and accessible and in very short form, to the point where it's like you can wrap your noodle around this even if you're not educated in the field. And that was an important starting point for me, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that matters. I know a lot of the people who are like trained in philosophy, they gave a lot of pushback on that book because he wasn't, using this or that term, or he wasn't framing something exactly the way they wanted it framed. And I think I think that just like excludes people. Like, I mean, obviously you want to be accurate, but
It does.
at the same time you don't want to like I don't know, we need to be bringing more people into this conversation. So uh yeah, no,
Look, if the ship I think we're getting a little bit of lag here, but if the ship is sinking and going down, I don't need to give you precise scientific details as to how the water started getting onto the boat. I just need to tell you that the water is now in the boat and it needs to be out.
exactly, I like that.
Yeah.
um yeah, and so that kind of, I guess, so this challenged your notion of self, and that I'm sure ties into ego.
Yeah, because it's like, what accomplishments can we assign to him? That was the next higher order question that was really tough for me. Knowing an individual who was in this predicament, it was like, how much do I value my accomplishments, and what are they based on? Because at the time, I valued them a lot. I was very proud of the fact that I like a super good gamer in a couple things. I was like a really high ranking platinum player in Counter Strike. Okay, well, that's because I have a certain set of skills that I was clearly lucky to be born with, and has absolutely nothing to do with what one might consider as an accomplishment. Challenging the idea of what accomplishments meant was really interesting for me. And that certainly comes back to the ego. Like, what do we assign to your name as something that you did? It just really.
Uh-oh, I think we had a
Oh
glitch there
no.
for a second. I think we're all right.
Yeah.
But yeah, you were talking
Maybe
about a kind of a sense of what we deserve or something like that, what we earn.
yeah, like it really calls into question what are we assigning as accomplishments, or what do we feel are earned accomplishments for an individual? Well,
Right.
clearly we overvalue them. That was obvious to me, right? With the whole sense of ego, it's like almost everything that you did was the help of somebody else. And this is obvious when we talk about a person who's in that situation where they literally depend on others for their daily functions
Mm-hmm.
and their daily lives. Like, that's obvious, right? Nothing he's ever done in his life were his own. Everybody's helped him. And that's not a bad thing. We don't have to be negative about that.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that, because it's still just as special when he reached a new milestone of being able to recognize maybe a different voice or a different presence in the room. It was very obvious
Hell
that he
yeah.
could recognize his mom's presence, but when he started to gain familiarity with other people, that's a huge accomplishment, because he doesn't have any of the resources necessary to do that well,
And
you know?
if you really think about it, maybe it's not so explicit for a lot of us, but really we're all in that same situation. Like, what can any of
Exactly.
us do alone? Like, that's not how humans work. We're not, our species didn't get this far because we're just like these rugged individualists with the can do spirit, yanking our bootstraps and whatnot. It's, it's our
Yeah.
superpower is our ability to cooperate in large numbers. And any of us alone, we're pretty weak. Like we're so
Yeah.
we really do need each other. And it's, maybe a an example like that makes it easier to understand. But yeah, really, that's all of us.
Well, and that's exactly what drew it up for me, right? Because then I had to start thinking about what are the things that I feel like I've quote unquote done myself. I've become a mythic raider in World of Warcraft. Well, okay, cool. That doesn't I didn't do that myself. That is a system of influences of the games I started playing when I was 3 years old, and skills upon top of skills, and it has to do with layers of information. And let's not mention the fact that I was born with a brain that was naturally good at some of those tasks.
Right,
Many people aren't, you
right,
know, and so it's really it's for sure a manner of luck, of biology and luck of neurochemistry, and not something that I actually did or created myself. And so the sense of pride about simple accomplishments really started to evaporate for me. And
oof. Think we're getting a little bit of lag again.
is
All
this any
right.
better?
Yeah, yeah. No, we're sorry about these issues. I don't, maybe I need to be using a different platform or something. Uh,
I I just switched. I was on my mobile data, which has been kind of sketchy ever since derecho. So
oh wow, yeah.
I just switched over to my Wi-Fi, and we'll see if that helps. I'm
Hopefully that
uh,
helps.
I'm a floor off, so I was, thinking that maybe it wouldn't be as good, but mobile data's failing me. So
Oh man. Did you see, like, I guess like a big chunk of the internet went down today? Like I was supposed to be a part of something this morning and it didn't work out. And
I
I
did not
don't
hear about that.
yeah, I don't know. I guess there was a problem, but that's not related to this. But let's see. Uh kind of talking about there's this notion in philosophy of just desserts, and like
Hmm.
what can you really say that you earn yourself? And I think we were kind of covering some of that territory. It's like I mean, when you really think critically about it, um there's not much you can really attribute to yourself or your ego or your free will, any of that stuff. Like when you really track it down. And I just finished up Robert Sapolsky's Behave. Um,
Yeah.
the structure of that whole book is amazing because he starts at like the milliseconds and the seconds before a behavior, and he traces it back to like minutes and hours and days, and then he connects it to evolutionary history. And basically his argument is this is where your behavior comes from. Like, how much of
Yeah.
this did you do? And you look at it and you say, well, I didn't do any of that. Like, and I think that's really what biology teaches us, is that um we're not running the show. Our
Yeah.
brains like to tell us that we're running the show, but we're really along for the ride. And I think there's definite benefits to understanding that. It can be difficult, and there can be suffering associated with coming to that realization, but I think ultimately it's probably better to have a worldview that more accurately reflects what's real versus less.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for some people it can be even destabilizing. But I think that has to do with other dependent, you know, belief structures that they have, and I think we'll learn a lot more about that as time goes on, as more and more people embrace the well, I'll say it. I think the truth of this idea, right? That the free will that most people think they have is an illusion, and that the concept of a self is likely a byproduct of evolutionary design, that was conveniently trying to give us a way to make better social animals of ourselves,
Right.
which I think is really the case, because it's easier to assign those accomplishments and those things if we can put a name to it and play a language game with it. But at bottom, the idea falls apart pretty quickly with some simple thought experiments. But if you've based everything else on that, or more importantly, really specific ideas about your worldview upon that, it can be very destabilizing. And so I do worry about that somewhat with this.
Right. Yeah, it's you know, we're almost all taught that being wrong is a bad thing.
Mm,
And I think that's just one of our sort of cultural flaws we have, is that like you you're supposed to think you're right even when you're not. And I think the conversation we're having here leans more towards the idea of we're probably wrong, and
yeah.
let's be a little bit more correct, or let's move towards the direction of accuracy versus inaccuracy, and not everything has to be so absolute. And I think that's kind of the healthier way to go, but you have to get over that hump of at some point you have to admit that you're not infallible, you don't really know everything already. And that's a lot of people think they already know everything, and there's a maybe it's a
Or,
Buddhist saying, something like
or,
that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
or to properly quote Obama, you didn't build that. That
that
one
was
caused a lot of controversy.
that was a good meme. He was saying something deeply offensive culturally, and yet
Yes,
true. It was
right.
true. And yeah, that's a great moment to kind of hone in on like where we're at culturally, and why we do have these hangups. You
Yeah.
didn't build that. And people go,
It's
yes, I did.
it
And they're
is the
so offended.
problem. It is the problem that we're addressing right now in this interview. I mean, it's very, that moment is going. It's more profound than we thought it was.
Oh man, yeah. Yeah, no, I really like that you brought that up. I hadn't thought about that too much.
Yep.
Of course, like in the moment I was like, "Oh, ha, he's kind of pressing their buttons." But yeah, no, that really is a deeply profound thing to kind of put in people's face and make them think about it. Of course, the
Yeah.
defenses come up and people try not to think about it, but what are you gonna do? Um, but yeah, no, like first, you gotta stop thinking you're right all the time, and you
Hmm.
have to. I was gonna mention, I think it's a Buddhist saying, but like if your cup is full, like how are you gonna like fill it up? You have to like empty your cup first, and
Yeah.
then you're willing to receive things. And so like, and I have to, these are those things that you have to tell yourself all the time, even if you do share this worldview. You still have to
Hmm.
tell yourself, I'm probably not totally correct, like
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's really easy to slip into those habits. Like they feel very
It is.
natural.
Well, and the utility or the massive amount of benefit of it from what you talked about, earlier, like having this view of reality that's closer to the truth. I think for some people, they very much have the idea that if an idea or a belief works well enough, then it should be left alone because it's clearly brought me all this good. And you can fail to realize how many ways that it could be better when you're
Right.
stuck in that mode. And that was, I sort of mentioned to you about my personal, situation, which, I mean, we can jump into that now if you wanted. But the thing that really challenged for me was how I viewed, a situation where I thought I was guilty of something my entire life until I realized I wasn't guilty of anything.
Right.
And that's the power that this free will thing has. And I think some people view that as people will let themselves off the hook for heinous actions. And it's like, no, quite the opposite, actually. It
Right.
becomes that much more important to evaluate people's actions and thoughts and what's in their mind, because it's a very good indicator of what they will do in the future.
Right. That's very profound. Yeah, if you wanna, I know what you're talking about, but if
Yeah.
you wanna elaborate on that, feel free.
So essentially, when I was still certain free will was the case, and certain that there was a God who was going to eternally punish me for certain behaviors, I found myself in a situation that was, quite frankly, wild. So when I was 11, I made probably my first longtime secular friend. It was an older boy that lived down the street from me, probably, like a 2-minute bike ride. It was probably 13, 14 houses down. And that older boy, I mean, he was about 4 years older than me, had access to things in the secular world that in my very sheltered upbringing, I had none of, whether that was metal music or Grand Theft Auto video games or, you know, any of those typical things. It was like, this is kind of a friend I wanted to have because some of these things were very attractive to me. They were things I wanted to
Right, it's
know
kind of
more and more
exciting.
about. Yeah. And at the same time, I was struggling with this guilt because I was giving into, what was considered sinful pleasures in my religion. And all of a sudden, two ideas and two worldviews started colliding all at once. And addicted's not the right word, but I became very consumed with all of these pleasures that I was being held out of in life.
Right.
And
If I could jump in for like
go
half
ahead.
a second,
Yeah,
I just want to tie this into stuff I've seen online. A
yeah,
lot of people complain about like cancel culture on the left, which there are legitimate complaints to be had there. But then when you say like, well, what about like the cancel culture of sort of the religious right or something like that? They'll be like, what are you talking about? And it's like, a lot of us had our entire childhoods canceled essentially.
yeah.
like, and and it's one of these things where it's like, we gotta think more clearly about like culture and what's good and bad, what's healthy and what's not. And a lot of times we'll put certain groups to arbitrary higher standards, and we won't look at what like the average is. And
Right.
there's a lot of work to be done on just like the average childhood experience in the U.S. A lot of us are subjected to things that are uh, pretty ridiculous manipulations that don't serve our well-being. I didn't mean to like jump in, but this is one of those
No, but
memes
you're
that's been eating at my brain lately.
you're you're totally right, because it was like, what in principle is wrong with my magic cards? Like, I'm just trying to play the damn game. Like, but you have
No, you're
people
trying
who
to
you
contact Satan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, something about that became clearly not true to me.
Right,
And so that was my first time where I started making, I think, really rebellious decisions for myself. That was like, I'm going to go against the teachings of my parents and the Bible and God, or at least what I'm being told are the teachings of God and the
right,
Bible, right? Because everybody has their own version of that.
right.
Eh,
Some versions are clearly worse than others, right? Like
yeah,
some
yeah.
of some
And
of this stuff's wild.
I think I got one of the worst ones when we're starting to
Yikes.
talk about,
Right,
magic cards being satanic portals to, and it's also funny to me, like, what was this based on? In the case of magic cards, it was, oh, this was made by Wizards of the Coast. Just the fact that they put wizards in their name, it was like, oh, clearly that's got to be freaking satanic. Like,
right,
there's no way that those people are any. It's like, you don't even know what they meant by wizards.
right.
Yeah, yeah. So it was just wild. And anyways, I started seeking these things out more and more. And what happened as a result of that, and it was unbeknownst to me at the time, but this boy who lived down the street picked up on a lot of those signals and saw that I was in this vulnerable position.
Right.
And um, he started using that as a way to coerce me into doing sexual favors for him. And so, it was like, hey, you want to borrow my Disturbed CD? You want to keep playing these video games or keep coming to my house? Like, became an expectation that I was going to need to please him. And the crazy part for me was, as part of the coercion, as often is the case in these type of, sexual abuse scenarios that I could have never understood at 11 years old, he would also do favors and do things for me so that it seemed like fair reciprocation was taking place.
Right.
And so what was I left with? I was left with the idea that I had participated in consensual gay sex that was going to send me to hell.
Right. Which is
Like,
which is
you
just not
know,
something the 11-year-old mind should have to deal with.
not at all. Not at all. And what's worse is, I mean, it went on for a year and a half. This was every weekend, kind of thing. And I was craving these secular desires so bad because it was obvious to me that they weren't bad. But the
Right.
buck stopped somewhere. It was like, okay, I've gotten over the fact that I don't think there's anything in principle evil about this Stained album, right? Like, Stained is clearly okay, but the gay sex is probably bad. Like, I'm still pretty
Yeah.
sure at that time that I'm doing something fundamentally evil, but I want the not bad things. And so I was making very weird negotiations in my mind. And it was because there was a battle that I would have not realized until my early 20s that was going on about this free will thing, right? It was
Yeah.
clearly like I had different conceptions about what was good or acceptable behavior than what I had been taught to have. And
Right.
that I was taught that certain things were intrinsically evil that were clearly not to me. But I didn't know how far to take that because I was, I was very young. I was meeting my first challenge of overcoming some of those things.
Yeah, you're kind of getting lied to from all sides. So like,
Yeah,
how are you supposed to sort through all that?
no, and where do I spend my time? At home, at church, or at his house? Like,
Right.
those were my three places that I would,
Yeah.
go in my life. And so it was literally like living two lives for a while. It was, here's my good church boy self that, yeah, sure, I only play worship songs with this guitar. And then any chance I got was like, shred it. Let's go.
Yeah, man.
Um
Thank you for sharing that, by the way. That's
yeah.
something that I'm sure someone out there needs to hear to kind of have their own experiences normalized and put
Well,
into context.
and the real thing came, I mean, the real freedom I had to be able to talk about it, like I said, it came in my early 20s because I reached a point where I realized he had power over me. First of all, just age power. He was much older. He could have physically overpowered me in any scenario. And I mean, we wrestled all the time, and you know,
Right.
this just sounds like homosexual boy love. The more I explain it, right? Like, I mean, we would wrestle, we'd get around. I mean, this kid was way bigger than me. He was way stronger than me, and so there was fear of physical manipulation. Although he was never violent in anything that we did, it was like that's sort of on the table. That's not off
There's
the
still a
table.
dynamic there
Yeah, and
that's
even if it's
established.
not being acted on, it doesn't mean that you're not afraid that it might be.
Right.
And that was really interesting when I started to explore that in my own, challenge to overcome what had happened. And then it was also the power struggle of he had all of the resources I wanted,
Right.
right?
Right.
And he knew that at the time anyway. Fortunately, the internet started to get really good between the time I was like 12 and 14. So some of the things that I could only get through him started to become easily available on the internet in a way that I couldn't get in trouble for
Yeah.
it. And
Napster.
yeah, right? Like
Yeah, man.
LimeWire, dude. Like,
Hell yeah.
so that just took the power away from him. And it's like when I realized as an adult that the moment he didn't have the power is the moment I realized I did not want to sexually please this kid anymore.
Right.
That's like a real powerful revelation, man, because it's like, what was I doing that for? Was it because I was making a conscious choice to engage in something consensual? Or was it because all of the motivational signals in my brain were saying, if you want the thing that you think is most enjoyable in this life, this is the shit you got to do to get it. And it
Man,
was more like that second picture than the first one. And that became clear to me.
man, and I tell you what a microcosm of just the world we live in, where
Yeah.
everyone's in these situations of like differential power.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's like uh, everyone submits to someone, right? And I
Yeah.
mean, none of us actually have like real autonomy over our lives. Even the people that are the most privileged and they have the most resources, they still answer to people, and a lot of those people are actually in you know really difficult uh, positions with a lot of pressure on them, and it's it's clear that there's something wrong with the way we've organized ourselves, and I think a lot of it
Mm-hmm.
has to do with these sort of foundational myths about our culture,
Mm-hmm.
about I said it before, but like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, you're responsible for your socioeconomic status, which is like if you've ever had any exposure to like any sociological material, once you see how groups of people play out statistically, it's real hard to understand how free will fits into that picture.
It
it's
just doesn't.
it doesn't.
It just doesn't.
It doesn't. You really have to like split your worldview into like, this is my subjective experience and this is what we actually understand mathematically about the world, and the two things can't be in the same room together. Like you have to, a lot of people have to be either in one mode or the other, and they can't really sort it out for themselves because they're clinging on to these narratives about how their subjective world works.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's sometimes the only way that somebody who's not looking at the data can do it is a really simple thought experiment. But it's kind of like you said, if you look at the dynamics between groups of people, especially when you talk about war and violence, right? If you take a two-person universe where one person got there first, accessed all the resources, consumed it all, called it his territory, called it his land, drew all the circles, and then
Urinated on everything.
yeah, right. Like he's essentially claimed all of this for France, and you must now oblige, right?
Do you
And
have a
and then
flag?
yeah, and then person B shows up. Is like, man, can I get like a cot? Like, like I need a spot to sleep, and you've got it all. How
Right,
long is it going to be if person A says no, screw you, before
right,
person B kicks his ass? Not
right.
very long.
Or at
Not
least
very
or at
long.
least tries to, and tries
Yeah.
to again, and like, and how long between those fights? Like you can only have peace for so long before that same dynamic erupts again. And yeah, no, that's a really good way of illustrating it.
One of my favorite thought experiments. I'm actually doing a video on it later that you can check out. But
Nice, will
yeah.
do. I appreciate your videos. I watch those. But
But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it is the case that we're in, and it's like, who would actually hold person B responsible? Like someone else, you've been brought into a situation where you have none of the resources you need to survive.
hmm,
Someone else has claimed them all, and then refuses to let you in on it, even though they've got more than enough for themselves.
right.
Where does free will fit into this picture here?
I mean, they should just yank on them bootstraps.
Yeah, like
Yeah, yeah, the real world
there
doesn't
is.
work that way.
Right. Either there was enough motivations that fell on the first person to decide to share, or there wasn't. And there's going to be violence or peace, depending on how that coin flips. And we need to understand what those motivations might be. Uh, and that's the whole point of this. It's like you have better tools for evaluating social life as humans if you abandon your notion of free will, because otherwise your evaluation of that same thought experiment is, well, I don't know what it is, because I don't think you have a good way of deciding who's right and who's wrong. I think the typical conservative view is like person B has no claim to that stuff. And it's like,
Right.
clearly that's wrong. Like you're a dick if you have all of everything and decide, you know what, your life isn't even important enough to give you a cot, a place to sleep, and a meal. You know,
Right.
like I think that fundamental moral intuition lies at the bottom of this problem that we've never solved.
Oh man.
We've been working on this assumption that, people have free will, and then we can evaluate their choices as right and wrong for so long that it's made us unable to properly evaluate those type of scenarios where someone's being exploited.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that's maybe one of the things as particularly as Americans, because we're big into this narrative. I think exploitation's one of the things we almost can't identify. Like
Yeah.
you literally have to have someone in chains before we're willing to say something's wrong. Like, and
Hmm.
there's even people alive that aren't down with that. Like,
Right.
it's like, what the hell's going on here?
You mean those people who are for private prisons?
Oh, geez, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, that's totally fine.
we still have slavery in this country. It just,
Yeah,
we just want to have the pretext of a crime before we put you in chains.
exactly.
It's so disturbing, and it's,
But hey, your shirt was only $6 at Target, so I mean, what are you gonna do? It's fine.
man, it's the land of opportunity. It's, taste the freedom. it's, it's
It might
yeah,
be that a guy who used to be your neighbor literally was forced to make this for $1 an hour, but we'll ignore that.
man, yeah. No, it's a painful, and a lot of people use this sort of, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Steven Pinker, this sort of
A very.
Steven, yeah, this sort of Steven Pinker narrative that, like, things are getting better and, like, everyone, let's just calm down a little bit. And I wouldn't say there's nothing to that, but at the same time, like, this narrative that you're putting forward, it's like, how can you be content in that world where, like, even if things are over time getting better, um,
Mm,
that doesn't cause me any, like, comfort. I mean, things are still
yeah.
so morally outrageous that, yeah, I don't know. I have to do something, and it's, I'm compelled to. And just like, you receive better information about your world, and you look at how, how just, I don't know, disorganized. I don't know what the word is. Just how messy and ugly things are for so many people.
Mm,
People living on like $1 a day, stuff like that. It's so much of the world has nothing, and the 400 richest people have most of it.
yeah.
And I didn't mean for this conversation to turn into a big, class analysis or something, but that's really, if you think about free will long enough, you run into these subjects. You really start
You do.
rethinking the whole premise of society.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, I mean, free will goes all the way down to the bottom of the fundamentals of the Enlightenment. We love to. I love to hear thinkers talk about the Enlightenment, and it's like, how enlightened was it if they got one of the basic concepts of how we operate in the universe wrong?
Right?
We need to keep being enlightened. That's the point. You don't just give up because you got a good idea. Not saying they didn't have some good ideas, but let's not shut the door on some new ones. But
No,
it
no,
is
we're at
such
the
the
end of
case.
history. Everything's cool.
Yeah, yeah. We solved it, guys. High fives all around. Cork the champagne, but not for most of
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, pay no attention to, like, the 1 in 5 children that are going hungry, right?
Yeah, yeah. And well, and that's the thinking that we have the best way of accomplishing our goals is exactly that problem. It's that whole idea of accomplishment.
Mhm.
Whose accomplishments?
Right.
If we're not succeeding as a collective, and if we're not allowing for the flourishing of everyone, then you can't claim your own accomplishments, because your own accomplishments came at the exploitation or the sacrifice or the suffering of a vast majority of others.
And there it is.
And that's why free will touches on some of these topics, because you can't get there without it. I mean, the only reason you think you have a just claim is based on this fundamental idea of free will, that you built this and it's your own and you're special. And it's hard for people to accept that they're not, but it's freeing when you do. I know for me, it was like, man, I started wanting to succeed in my career even more after this idea changed, which
Right,
was weird to me because that's what a lot of people think. It's like, oh, if it doesn't matter, you just won't be a productive person anymore. Why the
right,
hell would you do that? you know, that's not going to get you anywhere. I mean, it's like it's not like your needs change. No, none of these ideas change the fact that you want you and your family and your kids to prosper and your life to bloom into something. What it changes is your priorities in a way where you want all those things to improve, but you only want them to improve in a way that doesn't actually make other people's lives worse.
right.
And that's why it's so important to me that we get free will right, because we have the opportunity to make a move and our collective thinking that will actually account for more and more people to thrive.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, people pit, individualism and collectivism against each other, and I really think the only way you get to a healthy, autonomous individual is by having a healthy collective. I mean, I think they go
mhm,
hand in hand, and you really, if you pit them against each other, you're getting less. It's a sort of synergistic thing where like they're working together. Everyone gets more, everyone wins, and
right.
it's like it's that sort of non-zero sum thinking we gotta normalize. And that was, I know, we're both, big fans of basic income. That's one of the things I see in basic income, is just that ability for everyone to win. And the way that meme could, through the sort of economic program, could really get into people's psychology and really allow them to stop seeing everyone as like, potential adversaries, and start seeing everyone as like potential partners.
Yeah, yeah, and well, and you a lot of times look at things from the sociological perspective, where I come from the philosophical, right? So it's like, what 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 is going to happen when everyone has the power to say no to any job at all times?
Hell yes.
That's what I'm actually going. You want to talk about free will? What free will do you have when your options right now are do this or die?
Right,
Like that's what your options are now. How
right.
much? Where's your free will, buddy? Like right now, you go to work or you die. Like that's the system that we have because other people have stripped you from the ability to actually work for yourself.
And there's no autonomy there.
There's no autonomy there. But if you give me at least the means to procure my own resources of my own survival,
Hmm.
then I actually gain some of that autonomy back.
Hell
And then
yeah.
we'll really learn about human motivations and what makes us tick because we'll have the greatest grand scale experiment of all time as far as what are motivations that push people towards productive work and not. Because right now, I think you have an argument that we're the least productive we've ever been because
Oh yeah.
we strip people of this. Because we
Absolutely.
put them in a situation where you take a really dumb, stupid job, even if it's unproductive in your own life, even if it's unproductive for the company that's offering it to you, because how else are you going to get your next cheeseburger? Well, like, you know, we're going to learn a whole lot about ourselves if we did move towards that world. And it's funny because the world we're in right now literally just when you make people realize that, right? Go ahead. If you became homeless tomorrow, how would you work for yourself and create an economy with yourself to survive?
Yeah, good luck.
Uh, Did you have free will there? I
That's,
can't
yeah.
find it.
How those bootstraps working out for you?
Exactly, exactly. You have no choice but to come begging to people outside of yourself to survive.
Oh yeah.
And you might beg with just your words, but you might choose to beg with your labor. Either way, it's still begging.
Man, that's a really good way of putting that.
Yep.
You might be begging with your labor. I think that's where a lot of us are. Um
That's well, statistics would say something like 70%. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with David Graeber. He's a economic anthropologist. He wrote a book called Bullshit Jobs, and
Yeah. Yep.
yeah, I love that guy. He basically, asked for like feedback on like how people feel about their work, how they feel like they're contributing to the world, and it's like, half of us maybe are like not feeling so great about it, maybe even more. I know there's the if you ask people like are they engaged with their work, that number is like really bad. Like most of us don't feel engaged with what we're doing. And when you think about like how we're using resources and what's going on
Mm,
with the rest of the planet, our sort of ecological situation, it makes no sense to be wasting all these resources, putting out all this carbon into the atmosphere, and we're doing stuff that doesn't matter. We're doing stuff we don't like. I mean,
mm,
this is not what life's about. Like, and
yeah.
and deep down inside, we know it, but like you said, there's a sort of game going on where you kind of have to beg for your existence with your labor, and so it's like we got to cut that game out.
Yeah, and one really does wonder if free will is the root concept there that gets people away from this idea. Because I think a lot of people think, well, you chose to keep doing that job.
Hmm.
That sentence gets spoken in more debates I have about economics than anyone that is just the go-to. Well, hey, look, you chose it.
And it doesn't
Did,
mean
did
anything.
I?
It
Did
doesn't
I?
mean anything.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, oh man, I don't have the energy to start that whole dialogue with you, but you're wrong, buddy. Like,
Well, you gotta like push up your glasses and go, well, actually.
well, and that's the thing. It's like if you're already to the point where you're disagreeing about, how resources should be shared in economics, and then all of a sudden you find out that your real disagreement came down to free will. It's
Yeah.
kind of why I've shifted how I've started talking about basic income,
Yeah.
because I realized the argument isn't about whether or not we can do it. I kept getting that, like, oh, we can't do that. It's like, actually, you need about 5 minutes of economics education to figure out that it's really easy. It's
Yeah.
not hard. The real
Yeah.
problem is a lot of people think we shouldn't.
Right. Right.
So it becomes an ethics question. And then philosopher Alex pulls up his work pants and goes to work on that. And that's where I found out it really is that ethical problem of what do you think choice is?
Hmm.
Because if you think you have a choice right now, it may be that the only choice you have is a choice of masters.
That is it. That
It,
is full
and
stop. That's
yeah, and
it.
I do believe that is the situation we find ourselves in. I really
Hmm.
do. And making that case is harder for people, because it does get a bit philosophical, and there are some people that just don't want to rise to that level of thinking, and they have their reasons, and that's understandable. But I
Right.
worry about that because I think if we get away from it, it's like, look, you can choose to work for others for little bits of a time for them to share their resources with you. You can choose to commune with others for little bits of time for them to share their pleasure with you. And you can make all of these choices. But what of those choices ever come back to you being able to choose yourself?
Hmm.
And there aren't many. There
Right.
aren't many. If there are any at all. And I would argue that, in the United States, I don't think you can. I think in Canada, you can still move into the mountains and try to live off the land yourself.
The Canadians
Don't know
have
that
free will. You heard it here first.
I don't know that you want to, because I hear they have lots of dangerous animals.
Oh
So
man,
you're going to need some Bear Grylls style survival skills to make it.
dude,
Um,
true
but
story. I drove through British Columbia with one of my buddies,
yeah,
and we had been camping our way like across the U.S., and then we were planning on camping our way through Canada. We were on our way to Alaska, and we counted 13 bears in one
yeah,
day on the side of the
yeah,
road, and we're like, we're not camping anywhere around here. Like this is dangerous as hell, man. We gotta
yeah,
get out. Like just hit the gas, let's get out of here. And then when we saw the price of beer, we really hit the gas because it's it's like twice as much up there.
yeah, yeah.
As,
Well, hey, look, it's got twice the alcohol, so.
I don't. I'll just go with that.
They
And
seem to think it does.
oh well, whatever makes them happy. They got something figured out. But yeah, kind of what you were saying is like I don't know if free will is like really the core issue or the silver bullet or whatever, but that was seeing how deep the issue is and seeing how much of our world it relates to is like one of the inspirations for me trying to have these conversations with people like yourself. I had read an article by Yuval Harari. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Love his work.
He's a brilliant dude.
Super smart guy.
I just,
Intimidatingly smart.
oh yeah, no, he's fantastic. He's another one of these people that has a real talent for putting difficult, complex issues into like accessible language, and I
Hmm.
appreciate that so much. I just finished up his 21 lessons for the 21st century.
Hmm.
That's so worth your time if you haven't gotten to
I've
that one
I've
yet.
listened to it on. I've got the Blinkist, but I haven't actually gone full audiobook with it yet. So
Nice. It's
it's on
you
my
know
list.
most of it is going to be like an exercise in confirmation bias for people like us,
Sure.
but it's still great stuff. And he uses simple language, but it's still a sophisticated argument. He's not writing for dummies or anything like that. He's a good
Yeah.
guy. But yeah, an article that he wrote, uh, I shared with my buddy Corey that I mentioned at the beginning of this, and I was talking about like, oh, maybe I'll write a blog post, or maybe I'll write a paper or something about this, because I really feel like free will is one of these issues that like gets at the heart of so much of our confusion in society. And if we could get over this hump, we could connect so many other dots that like flow from it. And yeah, Corey talked me into like, hey, why aren't you doing a podcast? Like, why aren't you talking to people? And
Yeah.
as I let that kind of simmer, I'm like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And I'm obviously still learning how to do this. I'm not great at it, but I appreciate your assistance here so much, because you've given us so much good content to think about.
Look, and
Um,
I'm glad that you're doing it because you might not think that it's the core issue, but I'll tell you what. I can't think of very many conversations I've had about hotly debated topics where choice wasn't put forward as part of someone's argument.
it's everywhere.
It's
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 everywhere.
it's in almost every one. It's like, well, look, they could just not do that. That's always like people's like default straw man. It's the
Yeah,
easiest straw man of all time because everyone believes that people can just not do it. And it's like, if we could get that part right and all get on the same page about that, we would be able to have the real debates where they lie. It might not be the solution to all of our problems,
right.
but it can be the sense making mechanism that gets us past some really easy core disagreements
Hell yeah.
that if we both appreciated the truth that free will, at least the totality of free will, as in we think we have the absolute ability to choose anything at any time. If we could at least knock that down several pegs, we could get a lot further in our discussions.
I think so.
And and then we move towards just more mutual understanding of people who disagree. And
Yeah.
when we do that, like you said, I have a lot of influence from Sam Harris, and he pointed out that obviously there's a lot of hot topics in the media right now, and without going into them, one thing he said is we have two directions we go to solve these deep societal differences: conversation or violence.
Right.
And I think that's really true. And kind of like you said, it comes back to the statistics about groups and countries and things. You only have those two. That at bottom, eventually one wins or the other doesn't.
Yeah,
You
if
know,
things if things break down, they're done broke.
yeah,
They're like,
and
it ain't
then
gonna be pretty.
you're the guy finding yourself on someone else's land, and because he did not share with you, your only option left is violence, and that is really the situation we're in. And so anything we can do to have better conversation where people are operating from the same fundamental assumptions about the universe is so important. And so I love that you're doing this, man. I really do. I don't think there's anything in my mind that's more important. And I've said this to my wife before, and she kind of poo-poos me and is like, "That's a little too grandiose of a claim." And you know what? Maybe it is. Maybe I can't prove my claim, but I feel very strongly that free will is the biggest hump we need to fix. We need to get over that one and leave it in the dust.
It's man, I'm confident it's one of the biggies.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I'm very confident on that. So I kept you here for so much longer than I intended to because I was just being
I
self-indulgent
had
and having so much
I had
fun.
Hey, I got nothing going on. It's all right. Yeah, let's go for another 2 hours. Let me make
Uh,
a beer. No.
I just in the interest of someone actually watching the whole thing, I'm gonna have to like wind us down. But is there something that we missed? Some sort of project that you're involved in you'd like to plug? Just anything at all before we wrap up. Anything that we don't want to leave out?
I wouldn't say right now I have any projects going on, but I occasionally put out a YouTube video on my YouTube, which is just Alex Y Waite, WHYWAITE, and I, I I put a lot of my thinking there, and it's usually born out of when topics come to a head where I'm typing online and realize I can't make this whole point limited by this keyboard. And so I get frustrated and turn it into a video, a kind of vlog. And that's happened on there a number of times. Uh, and so some of it's contrived and a little bit complicated thinking that doesn't always come out the best because it's usually heated and in the moment. But it is some of the things I've put on there I'm pretty proud of. So
Man,
you can find me on YouTube.
awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I feel like text only communication, while it's obviously got like tons of utility, I think it has a lot of shortcomings. And you
Mm,
know, biologically, we're kind of wired to have this more like face-to-face interaction, and we're not really wired to read like gobs of text and to like really think through what the other person like intended to say, like when they put together their words. And it's there's a really interesting book out there. I don't know how well it's received academically, but I found it interesting. It's called "The Alphabet versus the Goddess," and
mm,
it was about like the birth of writing and how we kind of just went insane as a species. Like once we abstracted meaning into these symbols, and then we took the symbols literally, and we forget that our whole experience is kind of this like composition of metaphors, and we experience the world through the sort of filter of our own subjective experiences, and
yeah,
we lose a lot of that when it's just text only. So this is another reason why I think like video chat is really, it should be the future of productive communication. And I think uh, uh, in a messed up way, I think COVID has really given us a boost on making progress in interacting, not just through emails or Facebook posts or whatever, but actually like looking each other in the eye and hearing each other's voices and like really understanding like what our intentions are, and picking up on all the the body language cues that we
yeah.
miss.
Well, and for that matter, I'll leave with this PSA. Here's something we missed. If everything we've led to is this point, and you're still listening to me and Chet, and you just found what we just talked about to ring true, realize that halfway through your next social media post, halfway through your next social media comment, and be willing to tell yourself, I think I've reached the limit of what this medium will allow me to say, and don't say it. Because it's the best advice I can give anybody
I feel
because
like you're I
it
feel like you're
happens so
calling me
often.
out here.
You know what? I wasn't trying to,
I'm
but if
taking
you're
this
willing to,
personally.
hey, well, there's a lot of times where, look, man, it's like I didn't mean exactly that, and it sucks that you think I did.
Yeah,
And so it's better for both of us if we put down the keyboard and just talk to each other,
hell yeah.
and it's better for everyone that way. And the real problem I find is that people all of a sudden feel like that costs them too much of your time. And
Right.
that's a false premise because you actually then have to cost yourself more of your time living in a world where everybody understands each other less because we didn't bother to get it right the first time.
Right, right.
And
Better to have quality, instead of a bunch of low quality quantity.
yeah, yeah. If we're gonna disagree, let's have a really good one.
I love it. I love it. Alex, thank you so much for your time. I
You
appreciate
bet.
it. This was a
This is
fantastic
fun.
conversation. Like I said, if anyone's watching this and they want to participate in these conversations, there's the Free Will Project on Facebook. Just search for the groups and it should pop up. And also, if you're curious about Chirp, you can contact Corey Cottrell, or I can get you a link to get you on there. And it's kind of a fun little social media experiment, trying to improve some of this messed up communication that we're all trying to understand each other through. So once again, Alex, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hey, this was fun. My pleasure.